Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this morning's episode. Hopefully, the background music and my voice are balanced, and if there's any issues, please let me know in the chat section. The intent behind these Mr.Within episodes are really for me to try to paint a picture, a conceptual picture, and try to do it as try to get pretty much I'm trying to draw the most in the shortest amount of time. But anyways, I want to speak about something that is important, something that I feel is happening with many human beings, but they do not know how to identify it. They don't even know what is going on. So I wanted to speak about the inner life of the mystic, and in order for me to do so, I have to explain what a mystic is, and in some sense the significance of how the shaman, and not also explain what the shaman is, but I have to share with you how the shaman looked at the world. Now this is something where it is a bold kind of effort, simply because to consider yourself as something in a changing world is, for many it is a blunder. But I'll tell you how I'm approaching this. First of all, the mystic, everything in this life has a value if we choose to relate it to our psyche. That means there is a value system to everyone's perception. Right now, as I'm speaking and I'm sitting here in front of the microphone of my laptop, there's a value system. I look at the world and it has a sort of value for me. And this value, in some sense, contributes to what I speak about, really. So there is a value system to everything if we choose to be a conscious individual. The concept of the mystic is a very important one, and it is something strange happened in history, and modern history, I would say, where ideas of spirituality, they went beyond, you know what it is? It's as if the mystic is defined as the lover of the unknown, and I would say the spiritual person is defined as the person who is aware of the unknown. Shamans were people back in the day who, in some sense, through unconventional means, had a perception, had an access to perceiving the world. Shamans were known back in the day to live at the edge of towns, to not be in society, and to be called forth by nature to enter society when there was turmoil or confusion or whatnot. The shaman, in some sense, in certain traditions, I don't know about all shamanic activities, but I know that there were certain shamanic efforts where the shaman would, for example, have a bowl, and in that bowl, the shaman would have a feather, a stone, a piece of bone, like a stick, right? And the shaman would, in some sense, move all the stuff in the bowl and suddenly drop all of it onto the ground. And the way it dropped had a significance. You know what it is? It's like you accepting the alphabet and then throwing words, putting random letters into a bowl and throwing those letters and trying to see what kind of word is created, right? So the shamanic will had to do with a sort of effort expressed and then an observation of how the world received that effort. And the significance of doing something meaningless and then in an instantaneous awareness, in an instant, receiving meaning from it. It's the same thing, I would say, that we find in the New Age community, and all those people who are interested in tarot. They're interested in oh my God, is this card gonna tell me what I'm gonna do? You know what I mean? And so it's as if the meaning of life is not just written in the stars, it is in every moment that we can look at something. I would say the main difference between a mystical approach and a shamanic approach is that the shaman was a mystic, but the mystic is the person who is going all the way. At least the way I have understood it from a sort of yogic sense, Vedic sense, the mystic is wants to escape the simulation. There's a difference between wanting to live in the simulation and wanting to escape it, wanting to go beyond the repetition of materialism. A person's inner life, any person, their inner life is inspired by their outer life, but their inner life cannot be exactly similar to their outer life. And the thing is that the mind, I perceive, is that our inner realms are moving faster than our outer realms. That's why we get bored, right? If we were going as slow as the material realm, in some sense, we would never get bored. We would always be content. We wouldn't even need the idea or the notion of a future. It is only because our intelligence is faster than what we see, where we can have probabilities, relationships, we can fathom in some sense what will happen to something. Like right now in front of me, there's a coffee cup, I could suddenly in my inner realms imagine 1,000 years in the future. And it's as if like, would this coffee cup be here? No, it's like even the building I'm in might not be here in 1,000 years, right? So in some sense, the mind can move things. You know what it is? It's as if our body can only move in a world, but our mind can move the world to our body, right? And when we talk about the inner life, that is a completely different life. You may see someone who is weak or, inferior, in their outer life, but then recognize their inner life, they're a giant, and you may see someone who's like a giant in their outer life, but then you see in their inner life, they're living like a pebble rather than a mountain, right? Because our inner life is different, and to synchronize our inner life to the outer life is a challenge. Not everybody can do this. Even myself, sometimes I think about my mind is like literally experiencing a different location when I'm like anywhere. Like, so I'll give you an example. Let's say it takes 10 minutes to walk from like a building to a grocery store, In that 10 minutes, the inner location can change. The person can see a bird and think about how the Wright brothers built the plane. The person in that 10 minutes can look at a tree and wonder about how the view would be if the person climbed it, right? So the mind perceives phenomena, and it's earlier than the body can have a relationship with objects. The mind is already relating to the object, right? So the inner life of the mystic is how there is a faster dimension of realism, but in behind the eyes of the person. I would say here's the difference between a mystic and the average man. The average man looks at something and closes his eyes, and when he closes his eyes, the average man's like, all right, what I was looking at is gone. But the mystic notices the residue of the outer realms and the inner realms. That means the way I thought about kind of explaining the mind to, the human species is I thought about speaking about it as a space, because what we are best known for as creatures is exploration. So if a puzzle is given, the human species will attempt to solve that puzzle. Now, if the puzzle is the biggest puzzle of them all, the most puzzling thing of them all, how intelligence is being intelligence in a here and now that has been fragmented into a timeline, that means if I want to play the game of time, I was somebody yesterday, I'm going to be somebody in the future, so who the hell am I now? So when we so when we have time, and hopefully my voice is loud and clear, when we have time, we are not ourself. We are not a singular self, That means the way I exist, I experience my own existence, and the way the world experiences my existence are two different universes, and it's like this for everyone. We have an inner life. right? And this inner life is being avoided. That's the thing about society, where, you know, some philosophers kind of look at it and are like, okay, wait a minute, what kind of society are we living in? What kind of system of a global movement are we living in? We're living in systems that are machine-like, and what that means is laws are like the gears of an engine of any society, right? But the issue is that the outer realms cannot know your inner realms until you communicate. That means if somebody is stepping on your foot and you don't know, you can't, that person has no clue they're stepping on your foot. You know, only from the inner realms you communicate, and you're like, hey, get your foot off my foot, you know what I mean? Like, so it becomes a sort of, the inner realm has to share to realign the outer realm possibilities. And I would tell you the coolest thing, one of the most beautiful, incredible advantages of, in some sense, being a lover of the unknown, is first realizing that you are loving something that everyone is fearing. Right? That means it's as if we all fear the unknown because our knowledge is dependent on our past. But the future is a suggestion of something that will take place that is not necessarily similar to the past. Even though we've had, different scholars say like history repeats itself, or Terence McKenna has said the archaic revival, how something of an archaic value revives. That means the ancient resurfaces, right? Just like right now, you know, there was a man named Sadhguru. He made such a hilarious point in one of his lectures online, in one of his satsangs. He said, Sadhguru pretty much said, he said, you might not know what your great ancestor looks like. You know, you may not know like what they look like, but their nose is on your face. That means we don't have, like, as if an ancient pattern has continued, an ancient genetical memory. Because what is genetics? Like, what's the whole point of DNA? It is a pattern that has tried to transform the least in a changing world. That is really what our, the gene swarming on the surface of this planet is in some sense doing. It's like our genetics is trying to change the least in the most changing world, really. Inner space is important, outer space, we planted the flag on the moon, good job, science. And when it comes to inner realms, we still haven't planted a sort of flag of comprehension on what it is actually. And we're reaching an era where the species is becoming so conscious that we are noticing physical objects and non-physical subjects are simultaneously interlinked to mean something. By the way, questions are always welcome in the chat section. The mystic's inner life is an universal event. My understanding of humanhood is that it is very solid in the outer realms. In the inner realms, it is liquid. Beyond the inner realms, it is like gas. That means our identity is space. That means we are right now identifying with what is in the space, but the moment we realize we are aware that we are aware, we are actually space identifying with what's in it. Right? So the inner life of the mystic will be first seen to be the game of the biological body, but beyond the biological body, it is how, at least I would say in ancient Greek thought, there was the concept of time, and time had two dimensions. There was kairos and there was chronos. And chronos was chronological time. Even the concept of chronology, the word chronology, we can say it derives from the chronos probably. And Kronos, of course, has a Greek mythological figure, but at the same time, it is time, right? And so one type of time is chronological. Then there was kairos, and kairos was perceived as divine time, or the moment to do something, or the time to do what is right. Kairos was pretty much like your mind's pinpointing of itself in expression. So there was a sort of divine time, and there was a regular time, and it's very obvious why they had two senses of time, because back in the day in ancient Greece, people looked at clouds and they're like, yo, gods are walking on top of that. So because there were gods, there was it was as if time was an object, it was something between man and the gods, and man had a view of time and the gods had a view of time, right? And the view of the time from, I would say, the godly perspective was any time intervention. So what that means is it's like a simulation. Some beings inside the simulation don't know it's a simulation. Some beings outside the simulation know it's a simulation. Outside the simulation of the human reality, the game of human life, as in ancient times the gods were watching, right? I would say outside the simulation it is dehumanized, and it is non-identity based. And when I say dehumanized doesn't just mean there is no human perspective. A parallel universe is also a dehumanized humanism. If you are a person who's suddenly conscious that there's other simultaneous parallel dimensions, like right now, imagine as I'm speaking, some people are like, yo, Mr. Within's connecting to some energy. But I'll tell you, it could be a hilarious possibility that energy is multi-alive. So what that means is it's as if we think the soul is just one thing, but the soul could be like our hand. The soul is like the palm, and it has fingers extending from it, right? And so imagine this lifetime I am living, and giving this podcast, this is one finger of the palm of the soul, or one branch of the trunk of the soul, And so what I'm trying to say is that one moment is connected to many moments, and many moments are connected to one moment. If we have the consciousness that the many are connected to the one, we cannot be one. And that's what we find in human life, really. We find that every person starts in their own world, but there is a world beyond. That means there was a world here before we were born, and there will be a world after we die on this planet, right? And that world is way more important, and the events of that world are superior to the event of where we, enter the game of life, because when I try to have an analysis of my own life's value, I'm like, okay, if I just live for my desires only, if I just say, screw civilization, nobody understands me, and I just live alone, with a complete dismissal of the value of society, I would suddenly see it's as if it's as if I missed my own party. Imagine, having a party where everyone's invited, and so you're the host, and then the host doesn't attend the party, It's like a simulation of truth, but there's no truth in it, I would use that kind of analogy. But what I'm trying to say is pretty much there's an inner life, there's an outer life. We have been so defined by our outer life that we don't know how to engage our inner life. People think that they have to go to school so another creature, another human being reflects to them their own understanding of the world. I will tell you, every person is an explorer. There is no comparison game, or if a person is comparing themselves to others, they should compare themselves to their own invisible other, which means their past. So for every person has an inner motivational coach, and it's all their memories in the past. It's like, have you heard of the motivational speaker, remember your own past, the person remembers their past and they're like, oh my God, how much of a fool was I? Look at my progress now. You're motivated to enhance yourself. So anyways, when I'm, Can you imagine like a person's trying to motivate another person, and then that person's like, hey man, it's not possible to motivate me. I'm just the nervous system in the void. It's like you're trying to motivate atoms to be atoms, bro. It's like, how do you motivate atoms in the void, to a better life? It has to only be a transition into a multidimensional awareness where we are not just atomic, because matter doesn't care for stories. There is something else going on within the human experience that cares for the implementation. What does that mean? That for the implementation of the inner realms and the outer realms. That means when I'm giving this talk, right, even though there's so many like different topics I brush on, but at the same time, the only thing I care really is, in some sense, for example, the vision I've received about the title of the talk, to just share that really. Everything else is kind of like on the side. When I give these talks, it's pretty much the title of the talk is like a painting, and when I speak, I'm trying to repaint what I perceive in my inner realms vocally. What do we do with 8 billion simulations of the world upon a singular world? First thing has to happen is that without honesty and sincerity, no long-term project can be filled. And this is how I reason it, that the only way history has managed to come this far is because there were human beings that understood that the world that to come is greater than the world we're in now. Right? That is the only reason why I'm standing here, because my ancestors, and even if you're listening to this right now, your ancestors lived. They lived in the space-time continuum. They managed to get to the next phase of life, Something I often quote is like this fictional character named Commander Erwin Smith from Shingeki no Kyojin. He's asked by a soldier, is life meaningless? He shouts back and he says, life is not meaningless. Its meaning is found in some sense, those who we live for. So that means their life has a meaning, but we may not have access to it, and we build and live for those who will one day find it. That means I'm not sitting here acting as if I have already achieved victory of the unknown, because in some sense it's too big, right? The universe is too big. All we can do is go as far as we can, take the Olympic torch as far as we can, and before we actually exit this realm, we pass it on successfully, so that the inner life has somewhere to go, even though the body will be dismissed. And it's as if our body is sharpening our intellect with every experience it goes through, and I personally feel the human life is being wasted. It is being wasted. It is being wasted to self-simulation, when there's work to be done, you know what it is? So it's as if if every human being for a second was seen to be an employee of the greatness of the future of the civilization right now, it's as if all the employees are in the workplace, but they're not doing anything, They're like, okay, let's look at the clock, let's use time as a distraction to waste our lives in the day. You can say some people are addicted to cigarettes, and you can say some people are addicted to time being true. Time is an invention. It is the greatest invention. It's an invention of the inner realms that possessed us. People think the concept of possession is only on abstract creaturehood. No, it is wherever your attention goes. If your attention is on the color red, you exist in a red universe. If your attention is on the color blue, you exist in a blue universe. If your attention is on the color green, you live in a green universe. It is only that the truth of, I would say, it is like the roar of the soul among the ignorance of the mind within the illusion of the body. What that means is atoms are theatrically performing, thoughts in the inner realms are theatrically performing, and there is just one audience, which is the ultimate, I would say, which is unconditional awareness. That means from conditional consciousness, from noticing that we are a certain letter of our own alphabet, we then move on to the unknown. That's where mysticism begins. Mysticism is exploration. Every explorer on this planet has been indirectly a mystic. Why? Because the unknown has treasures that we have yet to find. That is what I'm trying to say to the planet all the time. That the past can never get it wrong. Our brains are, they're like a couple pound flesh. Our brains are not an advanced AI program that can calculate all the information in its environment, But if we treat our intelligence as an antenna, we can attain vision as it comes and as it goes. There's an incredible quote that every mystic on this planet needs to know. Every person, I think, really needs to know on this planet. It's a quote from Sri Ramana Maharshi. Two quotes, actually, I'll share them. One quote is Sri Ramana Maharshi says, hold on guys, let me find the exact quote. Sri Ramana Maharshi says, this quote was so important, I even wrote it on the description of my YouTube channel. Sri Ramana Maharshi says, you have to ask yourself the question, who am I? This investigation will lead in the end to the discovery of something within you, which is behind the mind. Solve that great problem and you will solve other problems. And then people are like, oh, Mr. Within, I see why you're saying advanced communication all the time, right? Because the greatest advancement of our communication is to recognize that we are the most advanced communication of this universal sector. That's it. We are the most advanced thing happening here, And we may build AI, and AI may do some next level crazy things, but we are still the most advanced natural expression in this realm. If this is a natural world, we are, in some sense, our species is the king. Our species has a royal role in history among all the other species. It's as if we are literally, all the other animals on this planet are looking at the human species. It's like, yeah, these guys are the awakened ones. Yeah, definitely. Let's call the whole species a Buddha. That means the species awakened to the interference and the involvement of other dimensions. We are not just an animal. And sometimes I think it's like, how hilarious was that conversation when Darwin went to his family and he's like, Ma, we're all monkeys, and Darwin's mother was like, how dare you disrespect, human progress, son, it's as if like Darwin's father gets mad at, Darwin. It's like, did you just call your mother a monkey, Darwin? Watch your mouth, like... But what it was, I'm just being playful here. It's just that there is a responsibility with the ability of intelligence. If you're able to do something, you should probably do it. That is what I'm trying to get to. Because it's too easy to be inferior. Being weak, being failure, all of this stuff is too easy. That means even if it happens, it's too easy. It was one moment where the realm stopped, and then in some sense your attention goes to other continuity, It's like, what does a person do when they come to a dead end? They're born again towards a different direction, It's literally like a chess game. And life is a giant chess game between the known and the unknown. And I would say Mr. Within's strategy is to let life move first, then you make your move. That means when I'm giving these talks, I have observed something that has moved before I have, and then how I have moved becomes a comment on that movement. When it comes to the mind, the pointers that I'm making is that it's space. Another thing about the mind is that its driver is attention. You pilot intelligence, and that means where your attention goes, somebody had said it, reality flows. If your attention goes to its core, to its source, that means everything has a core of intelligence. You know, in Chinese thought, in ancient Chinese thought, and of course being a little bit in the mythological context of, you know, kingdoms and of heavenly kingdoms and divine attunements, I would say it's as if everyone has a golden core. You know, this is something I respect about Chinese philosophy, that rather than having a relationship with narrative, with ideological narrative, Chinese thought has a relationship with experiential energy. You know, that means human beings need something to look at to have a conclusion of, right? And so it was as if in ancient Chinese thought, they were not looking for divinity as a sort of ideological, as an idea to rule them or rule all other ideas. They were looking at it as energy, simply. As if we are an organism, as if the universe is a biological being and we're just the cells inside imagine the blood cells in your veins suddenly became conscious, developed their own schools, their own education, their own philosophies to try to see why you move as the whole universe, right? And so ultimately, people are left to be content. That means when your imagination doesn't go further, that means you have imagined enough. That means what you have seen so far is enough for you to attempt to solve the puzzle. You know, because there is no perfection. Perfection is a sales strategy, is a marketing strategy. You know, we can't be perfect in the same sense. I was saying it in last night's episode, where Rumi says, this poet from 700 years ago, he says, if you make your hand into a fist, eventually the muscle will get fatigue and your hand will go into a paralysis. If you keep your hand like a fist, intense gripped fist, you know, and if you keep your hand stretched out completely, the extremes of the movement of the muscle or a suggestion of the extremes of the movement of thought. That means if I just say we're all just spiritual beings, I will eventually paralyze my view on life. Right? If I say we're only material beings, I will eventually paralyze my view on life. Why? Because it is in some sense a balance. It's like we don't need truth ideologically. We need enough of a balance in the inner realms and the outer realms, where like the wings of a bird, right? Your outer life and your inner life are flapping simultaneously. You know, the chat section today is quiet, you know. It's like, I think that people don't like the wallpaper. By the way, guys, a quick update about the membership details of the channel. I've decided something where there will be project supporter meetings. So anybody who becomes a member of the YouTube channel, in some sense, there will be group meetings. You know how you have like, let's say, a board meeting for a sort of company, or you have like a gathering of minds of an area, you know. So members, there will be project supporter meeting events, pretty much. That's all I'm saying. You know, guys, I just thought of something funny. It's like the video doesn't get engagement, and imagine I just blame the wallpaper the whole time, you know. You know, it's like, what do people have against trees, you know, and sunlight, you know. Anyways, to continue and to change the song into one that has less existential anguish. All right. Be conscious of your inner life. You can become conscious of it instantaneously. You can become conscious of it when you wonder about the meaning of anything. If you wonder about what does an object mean, you will become conscious of your inner life. If you wonder about what a subject is, you already are conscious of your inner life. And we have to start considering three positions, even though people are like, oh my god, did I hear the word soul? What an outdated word, but I'll tell you, the body mind soul model of perceiving human life, where there is a physical dimension like a solid state, there is a sort of mental dimension like a liquid state, and then there's a supreme witnessing state where it is like the gas state. If we have these three dimensions and we recognize that in some sense the work of the body is survival, this cannot be debated. Darwin hit the nail on the head. Right? So the work of the body is survival. The work of the mind is expression. Believe it or not. That means if we were to look at life, nobody could possibly fail. Why? Why is it that nobody can fail? Because the mind expressed. That means existence. It's like your existential mission in life is like to exist. And if you exist as a creature, you have survived, you have sufficed, you have continued. That what I mean is that you have completed your physical mission, right? But then we talk about the mind's mission. Like, what is our mind here to do? Right? Is it here to just watch the body survive? Are we here to is consciousness taking care of its own body like a dog on a leash, and the leash is made of the intelligent of the person's beliefs, right? So it's as if there is something more than physical survival. So when it comes to the expressionism of the mind is like living in multiple worlds, the body is living in one world. And what happens when you live in multiple worlds, or in your inner life you have some sort of multidimensional model, what happens in the inner life is that they coagulate. What that means is that life infuses instantaneously in the inner realms. In the outer realms, it may not, And if you pay attention, human beings, because we're trying to live a chronological life, because we are using time to make sense of the system of our life, right? When something instantaneous happens and something of an unknown nature happens, what does the human being say? A miracle, Imagine a person falls from somewhere and nothing happens to them. What is the response? A miracle. Something instantaneously unknown happened to the expected result in time. And perhaps the species would truly appreciate Plato. This is something where I'm like, so many universities are talking about Plato, but nobody talks about what Plato said about time. Plato, it's as if his friend asked him, hey Plato, what is the time? Do you have a sundial? And Plato's like, buddy, it's night. No, Plato didn't say that. Plato looks at the... Plato says time is the moving image of eternity. That's what I'm trying to get to. What it means is time is a coin. One side of it, A, B, C, D. The other side of it is A, B, C, D are simultaneous. The poet Hafez says something incredible. He says truth is like the sun casting endless shadows of objects. That means as many as there could be shadows in the world, there are truths. There are self-truths, truths where the person's eyes see first. You could say all explorers, they were actually in a domain of self-truth. But then you find something in let's say an explorer finds a new location, or an inventor creates a new device. That inventor's like, okay, should I share this with everybody? And beyond the motivations of greed and towards the superiority of just the species, we are designed to share. That is it. I am telling you, it's like an internal urge. I'm telling you, in the human animal, where we're like, something's happening behind my eyes. It needs to be enter the outer realm. So we are really like going through a psychology where I would say every day, throughout the day, what happens, there is a pressure point and there is a release point. Or I would say there's an expression threshold and there's a reception threshold, right? Based on the reception threshold, it's as if input, the world, things are happening, and let's say you're silently just going forth through the day, you're soloing out the day, and so it's like you're solo leveling. And so it's as if all the information becomes stored, as if you are like a magnet, or like an antenna receiving all the signals of your environment. And then at some point through the day, all this energy has been collected, all this awareness to the geometry of phenomenology has been collected. Now what does the brain do? You have two options: either you release it in your inner realms, or you release it in the outer realms. And all those people who want life just to be easier, they want to release it in the inner realms. And those people who in some sense honor the physical realm and live alongside it, they release it in the outer realms. You know, mystics were really phenomenal beings. They are the human wonder of the world. For me, that's how I perceive yoga. It is not just, exercise in yoga pants. Yoga is really a suggestion that the human being, the inner realms can become so gentle and so calm that like as the poet Rumi says, let the waters settle and you shall see the truth mirrored in your being, the truth of the moon and the stars mirrored in your being. That means you begin to see truth the moment you stop being untrue. That's the algorithm. Not that you go look for treasure, not that you think spirituality is just one modality. We're in a dynamic world. It means that those who get enlightened are not individuals, they are movements of moments. It was a fascinating mystery for me. When you look at Vedic thought, there were 4 stages to life. That means, imagine you change life into 4 quadrants. First quadrant, you're here to learn. So first quadrant, the child until the age of 25, for example. I think this was how it went in India, where till the age of 25, you're a student of the world. You're not here to, in some sense, teach. And not that there's nothing wrong with sharing, because teaching is really just relay, it's sharing, unless you're teaching something new, where then it becomes an artwork, where then you have to, like a painter, just grab a canvas, grab some paint, find a brush, and run to the stage. Right now the species is getting nervous. Like, that shit has to go, in the sense that everybody realizes we have one life to share. Your inner life happens once in the way that your body is happening once. Because the body happens once, it's as if you have multidimensional secrets behind your eyes. And so, in some sense, how important are these to be shared? Now, from the yogic view, the first quadrant was you become a student. The second quadrant, you in some sense become. What was it? I may be messing up the order, but it was like you were a student for the first 25 years, then you worked for the next 25 years, then you in some sense were with the family for 25 years, and then after 75 you were like this old man, and you're like, what do I do with my life? And after the age of 75, they would go into the mountains, and the yogis would go and meditate. And it wasn't only at that age, right? Life is not an absolutist like idea, right? So when I'm speaking about this, there's always unknown variables to the system. But what it was it made me fascinated. Like, why would a human being go into a cave, be silent and still, and stay in the same spot for maybe days, even in legends, years, right? Where yogis, where human beings would just stop participating in the outer realms. And you know what it was? It was as if like the outer realms is like a video game, and there were some very advanced souls, you can say, in this realm, where they would put that video game on pause, and they would notice how the inner life is taking place, and they would go into the inner life. And now the inner life can pull you. This is what we in culture that requires a balance of the inner, in modern society where we require balance of the inner and outer. If a person gets pulled into their inner, what do we do in society? People brand the person as crazy. Why? Because the person is oblivious to what is going on outside of the simulation of their own mind, right? But if we can have a balance, again, keep this analogy of a bird moving its wings at the same time. If we could find that sort of position, which I have envisioned the advanced communicator to be that, then there is no, there is no normality. There is just a changing world, and it's how we're piloting in it. That means we can't judge a changing world. That means, how do you believe in something that is changing? Can someone tell me? People can write in the chat section. Every day you're growing, the cells of your body change. This means you're not the same self. So even if the person has the same belief, you are a different self having the belief. Therefore, you cannot have the same belief. Every day is a new day, suggesting a new universe is founded. Sorry guys, this was on mute and I was just firing away. Life is universe being man, and man realizing his universe. Anytime a person realizes the inseparability of the individual activity and the cosmic activity, the collective activity, there is no longer a need for meditation. Why? Because the antenna has received the selfless signal, has found a mirror, right? The best thing that these talks of mine can be is a mirror, because I'm telling you, we're not in this world to become a species that are like clones. Everybody has the same sort of happiness. It's like impossible, like that. Not only that it's impossible, but it's unnecessary. It's our differences that make us unique, as if every person born, their uniqueness of their DNA is a unique alphabet of humanity, right? And so when we connect with other letters in the alphabet, we become words, and words in some sense become the container of worlds, right? And every person has some sort of relationship with movement. I mean, it's impossible to not have. And this is why I'm saying, if a person can notice something is being something, they are healthy. They can be healthy. That means even in psychosis, sometimes I, as a hobby, when I was young, guys, I wanted to be a psychologist. But then when I realized what psychology was, my efforts kind of changed, right? And when I say psychology, I mean, I'll tell you a hilarious story. I think I was 11. I had this email, for some reason it was called, this is me being very young, and it was called Kill You Beast, something like that. And I remember my parents were having a conflict, and in some sense, me and my brother, twin brother, this is imagine two 11-year-old kids going and sitting at a door at the back of the front door of the house, because the parents were fighting to a point where one of the parents wanted to leave, right? So the kids, me and my brother, were blocking the door, right? And I remember I had made an observation that had calmed down my parents from a debate, just this 11-year-old kid talking. And it was so, I felt, I don't know, proud of my communication. I remember with this email called Kill You Beast, I sent this childlike email. I was just 11. I sent an email to the University of Philadelphia, and I'm like, I think I have a, psychology degree. I have like an awareness of complex psychology, right? And I never got a response back because then I was 11. I hadn't noticed like my email and his name. But what I'm saying is I had a passion to understand the mind simply because it was the pre-stage before the concept of the soul, whereas a young kid in a theological society one is introduced to. The mind is field-like. If I was to give a comment on exactly what a yogi could be experiencing sitting in a cave and their body being automated by a samadhi state, how the body is automated by a samadhi state is because the body is actually, it doesn't exist. How the body exists, it's like a keyboard, right? And the mind is pressing keys on this keyboard. Okay, if you take this analogy, so now imagine the mind stops pressing the keys on the keyboard. What happens? Like if you had a computer, the Word document just would remain, right? So if there is no input into the psychology, there is no individualism. When there is no individualism, the body has to become automated with nature. Right? So a mystic may suddenly realize that their body doesn't belong to them. Your body is the world, and you have rented elemental consciousness for some time. Right? That means it's as if it's like Tony Stark lending his friend his Iron Man suit. Right? So it's as if the Gaian mind has lended us, our biological position. Right? So that means our bodies belong to, they are the earth, literally. They belong to the earth. But the mind that moves the body in earth has creator status over the earth because it simulates it as conscious reception. And because it has creator status, it can in some sense non-identify with the biological body. So the way it goes on auto cruise is that your body becomes literally the world. Literally, like how many animals function in nature undistracted by language, having an incredible concentration through single pointedness of an awareness to the moment. That means, let's say you were a meditator and you're like, what should I meditate next? And this person called Mr.Within is telling you, meditate on your whole moment, on the whole thing, on all, and try to find the edge of your intelligence, because you have one lifetime to do so, to see what you were before the curtains of elemental consciousness are pulled. To be a mystic means to be honest as a human being and to recognize that there are unknown variables. So no absolutist theory can win. This is how man surpasses, transcends language. When he realizes it was a room he was in. I would say people don't use words, people live in words. People live in geometric contexts. And that's all that words can be, because words are relaying images, right? That means there's movement happening in the world and we're ascribing sound and an inner image to it, right? So when a person says apple, a person doesn't just see the letters A-P-P-L-E, the person also sees an object, right? And so when the attention gets to that level of just hyper presence, I would say, or a friend of mine called it pure thought,
Your presence is an unconditional energetic phenomenon. So what that means is nobody can be afraid of the unconditional. Unconditional means no opinion granted access further. That's what the unconditional means. And when one taps into that in their intelligence, like right now, my heart, I'm not thinking like heartbeat, like I'm not I'm not instructing my heart to beat. It is automatically happening. And imagine how many truths of the world have nothing to do with human thought and they're just happening. And we have to have the audacity as mystics, and I would say in the outer realms as advanced communicators, to be honest with what we are actually experiencing as human beings, right? That means just the fact that we have the concept of mental health makes no sense. Because the mind is not an object. The mind is in some sense just where you are moving the flashlight in a dark room. That's what the mind is. In a vast, giant, dark forest, it's as if we are explorers of the light of our eyes, of the light in our eyes. So, I'm going to read some quotes on shamanism. There's a quote I've shared in the description that is very important. It is from this man, called Terence McKenna the Great. He says, "Nature is not our enemy, to be raped and conquered. Nature is ourselves, to be cherished and explored. Shamanism has always known this, and shamanism has always, in its most authentic expressions, taught that the path required allies. These allies are the hallucinogenic plants and the mysterious teaching entities, luminous and transcendental, that reside in that nearby dimension of ecstatic beauty and understanding that we have denied until it is now nearly too late." Right? That means it's as if like man has access to a great dimension, but the way society has gone forth, it has made people live inside boxes comfortably. And when you're comfortable inside a box, it's as if like, you never know what is beyond. And that is in some sense a regret, That means if we say the best life is to live a life that you have the least amount of regrets, I would say a regret would be to see what kind of intelligence you were and at what level this could be expressed, at what capacity, right? Because language use is just 1/4 of intelligence, right? That means if somebody told me there were 4 types of people, let's say 5 types of people, okay? One person was comfortable with emptiness. I'll be like, okay, badass. That person is, an advanced person. Let's say that one person was only aware of like the singular. That means there was, let's say, so 5 types of human beings. First human being thinks, not things, just the way the world has opened to them is empty. It's like, damn, I'm in an emptiness. What do I do right now? So that's like one human being. And other human beings like, yo, this isn't empty. This is all one supreme intelligence. It is a singularity of intelligent expression as the whole universe being alive, right? So that's like a person seeing oneness as truth. So the other person saw emptiness as truth. Now, the next person sees duality as truth. What does that mean? That means there isn't just oneness, there isn't just emptiness, there is an endless spectrum of a sort of division of truth, where it's as if truth is neither the light, it is neither the shadow, it is both being witnessed at the same time, because that is the full content of the information. So the third is the dualistic human being that looks at life as duality. And then we have a human being that thinks life is just infinity. Forget oneness, forget emptiness, forget duality. It is just truth being endless. It's as if like the post-heaven entrance, effect of the mind, And the fifth person is the person who has recognized all reality is being simulated as presence. So what it is that we have thought living means free will has to control forcefully reality, but that is not the case. It is to watch how the moment happens, as if not that you are an obsessive main character of your reality, but that you in some sense are the light That means I don't treat myself as an actor in this elemental world, I treat myself as the spotlight where the theatrics of reality take place. And whatever happens, I know that the watcher within is untouchable. There's a story shared by this Sufi mystic poet from 700, 800 years ago by the name of Attar of Nishapur, this Persian mystic, right? And this Persian mystic, he shared this story that back in the day there was this grave, grave digger, and there was this person who worked in a graveyard, and for 40 years he had just lived in a graveyard every day, burying the dead, every day contemplating what is death, And so one day this person goes up to this gravedigger, in the graveyard and says, "Hey man, you've lived in this graveyard pretty much for 40 years. Like, tell me, what is the most shocking thing you've seen?" And that's a great question to ask, by the way, So, and this is something Attar is saying in his literary work, like 700 years ago, by the way. So the context is old. Now, what happens is that the gravedigger says, I'll tell you what the most shocking thing is I've seen here. I have for 40 years every day buried people who I looked at their lives, young, old, all, whatever the lifespan range was back in the day. And he's like, I have seen the world change, but every time I have been digging graves, there has been something from inside me looking outside that has never changed. That means this gravedigger in Attar's story is enlightening the person. The most shocking thing is the unchanging quality of the energy that cannot be created or destroyed, or the presence of the witness. And when I use the name Mr.Within, I mean, hey, reality is an inner simulation of the outer. And how have we avoided this long, When will the advanced communicators roar, in modernity? It's as if there is a space for the pilots of consciousness. Those who choose to live as minds, it's as if the gods are like, okay, send them to their greater workspace. Your karma becomes intelligence filled. If you care for the world. If you don't care for the world, you exile yourself from intelligence. So there are some people who they are rejected by truth, and there are some people who reject truth. Those are like, And it's not that truth is an absolutist ideology. I keep emphasizing this. Anyways, I'll just share more quotes. Amy Hardy says shamanism is the oldest form of communicating and healing. It probably resides in all of us. Carlos Castaneda says it isn't that a warrior learns shamanism as time goes by. Rather, what he learns as time goes by is to save energy. This energy will enable him to handle some of the energy fields which are ordinarily inaccessible to him. Shamanism is a state of awareness, the ability to use energy fields that are not employed in perceiving the everyday life world that we know. Michael Harner says what's really important about shamanism is that there is another reality that you can personally discover. We are not alone. What an incredible quote. Hank Vesselman says shamanism is not a religion, it's a method, and when this method is practiced with humility, reverence, and self-discipline, the shaman's path can become a way of life. I would say self-discipline may lead people astray. Why? Because it is selfless discipline. So what I mean by that is that let me tell you guys, it's as if there's two worlds, but we're aware of being only in one. The shaman has noticed the second world and is living in accordance to the laws of the universals, of the universal principles of the inner realm. That means it's like Buddha saying the nature of an object is empty. That means two people can look at an object and it can mean something different to both of them, right? So that means objects don't have a nature. They are not the thoughts we imprint on them or impose or overlay on top of them, right? So what it is really emptiness reincarnating as consciousness. So consciousness is like a dolphin jumping up and down out of emptiness. A fellow by the name of Starhawk, I think maybe a chieftain from some tribe. He says the old religion, as well as we call it, is closer in spirit to Native American traditions or to shamanism of the Arctic. It is not based on dogma or a set of beliefs, nor on scriptures or a sacred book revealed by a great man. Witchcraft's inspiration in the movements of the sun, moon, stars, the flight of birds, the slow growth of trees, and the cycles of seasons. Okay. So here's the thing. Anytime people hear the concept of witchcraft, they should consider that as cultural. What I mean by that is the ego is a cultural phenomenon, because when we are alone, we don't need to exist as an idea to ourselves. We're just watching as the biological presence of the intelligence, right? So concepts, they are social phenomena, right? And so the concept of witchcraft, I would say, and of course I'm not someone who has cared enough to dabble in that stuff, but I know that ignorance is ignorance. It doesn't matter what way you frame it, right? That means it's as if you have one lifetime to be an honest expression of the decency of the realm for its own advancement, and it's as if like the person, what you want to choose, a plane ride or a horse ride, you know. So the person chooses an airplane when it's about when you're trying to get to the future, you know. It's like, imagine trying to get to it's like he ran towards the future on horseback, you know. Can you imagine time traveler comes and he's like, you know, he's on a horse and people are like, oh my god, this time traveler, you know, teleported here with a horse somehow, you know, galloped in through time, you know. And the time traveler's like, yeah guys, it's like, who knew horses can just travel time, you know. It's like the human beings were trying to build time machines until, you know, suddenly they realized that. Imagine, guys, this is hypothetical. You know, and so that time traveler gallops back into the future, you know. Okay, so we have questions. Daniel says, do you think that human civilization's karma can be cleared up sooner than it seems? Most people seem to be under the impression it needs to get worse still before better. Daniel also says, to me that sounds like a decision, not an analysis, but when it's thought, it's determined. Okay. So I would say, first of all, that's an incredible approach. Yeah, there is a karma to civilization, but we cannot process that karma. That means it's like a multidimensional system and like so many different creatures inputting intelligent activity onto the planet. This intelligent activity, the more our population grows, will impinge, right? So eventually chaos is unavoidable. The issue is that how do we create more space before the chaotic outcome? You know, so I would say rather than trying to think of how do we clear the species of the karma, we recognize in an instant, you know, because that's the nature of the mind. Your body cannot change into an instant, right? I can't like change my physical body like the X-Men character Mystique, you know what I mean? But like, but for example, I can change my mind in any moment, you know? Just with the input of new information, the person has to, they are automatically changed. It's like, how can you explore and not have the same worldview? So I would say it's the civilization's karma is how it is causing reality to go forth. So the way it's cleared up is if people become conscious of what they are allowing from their inner realms to go into the outer realms, and they just care for, you know, the best attempt. Because what can you ask from a temporary creature? Just try your best before you die. I mean, like, what else can you do? You know, there is a quote where it's like a kind of heartwarming idea, you know, hope-giving idea, where the poet Rabindranath Tagore says, faith, let me find the exact quote actually. Tagore, faith bird quote. Hold on one second. Faith is the bird that feels the light when the dawn is still dark. That means in the darkest hour, that's when the sunlight comes, right? So if civilization keeps getting worse, we just have to endure until we get bored of the hopeless scenario. And then hope is like just an additional dimension of perspective, remodifying the past view, you know? So I'm saying either way, if it becomes a dark night of the soul of humanity, eventually the sun will come at the darkest hour, you know? And if we realize we are the sun, you know, I think it was Rumi or I think it was Hafiz, he's like, carry your heart like a life-giving sun in this world. Can you imagine the vision of that? That means as if we are here, we are actually life givers, right? You know? And not in the outer realms, you know, only women. But in the inner realms, all minds can share, you know? And it's just the quality of the information suggests the quality of our success. And this means that if we want to usher humanity into an advanced communication era, what kind of quality of communication are we advancing? Do we want 8 billion honest human beings, or do we want 8 billion human beings who think being smart means be cruel and gain? You know, it's as if reality has to update. It's like, holy shit, when is the update gonna happen? Daniel says, so so since all karma is based on input, output gains more and more value. Yeah, the value of the output is based on the input. That means how your attitude takes in an event suggests how that event becomes a memory for you. You know, how it becomes part of how we value something, you know. What a good question. There is a value to our eyes that goes beyond what we can understand in current society. We have certain clues, as if the great puzzle of humanity is what is the best outcome to the human energy, to the effort of the human energetic, expression that we all are. And best outcome is comfort, and through comfort and gentleness and inner peace, we build a civilization that is in pieces, you know, that from the pieces, you know. So what I'm saying is outer realm, broken world, inner realm, the source of how things can fix, and literally the brain can command the signal into the moment, reorganizing the meaning of everything. Right? I am a person who, I would say, in my inner realms, I have had not just dialogue, I have had moments where I have been preferenceless, and the inner realms, what I have fathomed to be the logos, has moved the identity. And when the logos moves the identity, so you know what that means? That means you imagine being a geometric shape in your inner realms, and that geometric shape in your inner realms automatically moving on its own. That means it, like, imagine being a geometrical entity to yourself beyond your eyes, and this geometrical entity is free from all language and all emotions. That means when you're shaped like it's like nobody ever says, you know, how did the square feel, or how does a circle feel, you know, or what is a triangle experience? Like nobody ever says that. Why? Because we can't ascribe humanness to geometry alone. It is only when the geometry behaves in a certain familiar way we're like, yo, that's a human being, rather than just a random event of existence, you know. One last quote I'm going to read about shamanism. I'll read 2 quotes about shamanism. 3 quotes. Daniel Pinchbeck says shamanism is a kind of universal spiritual practice with indigenous cultures around the world, and one important element of it is taking care of spirits. Terence McKenna says shamanism is essentially a living tradition of alchemy that is not seeking the stone but has found the stone. Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. That means that means if there was a philosopher who wanted to be a shaman, the philosopher would realize that one wants to interpret life through their own free will, but when you stop trying to control life, you just automatically see what else controls it. So that means, imagine you're a person who you don't know if there are invisible extraterrestrial entities on the planet, so you go and sit somewhere, close your eyes, completely still and silent, and just try to see if, when you don't project an idea, what sort of idea animates in the inner realm. Right? That means this is a very spectacular thing to maybe say, but that it's like we don't think alone, literally. That could be a possibility. It could be that every person there's a simultaneous dimension where in an invisible, let's say this is hypothetical, of course, but let's say in another invisible dimension, parallel existence, around every human being there is advanced alien technology like probes or whatever. And what I mean by this is like just to fathom the possibility of another overlay of meaning, because truth is the least changing existence, at least how man is acknowledging it now, right? But in the shamanic mind, it's as if you had already been at the mountain peak, you were climbing down. When you were climbing down from the mountain peak, that means you had found contentment with the ultimate. And the moment you accept the universe for what it is, rather than what you have to be, then you find an absolute, I would say not absolute, you find a freedom in every moment of the simulation of your mind. You just know it's like realizing the mind was not you, right? That means how your thoughts have happened so far, it can't be you. You are the one that is aware you have the thought, and that awareness cannot be a thought. And last quote, or I'll share two more. Alberto Villoldo, shamanism is not a course, but a life journey. Terence McKenna says, the reason for the emphasis on shamanism and on other techniques is you will need techniques if you go into the deeper water, and they can make your life very simple and save you from unnecessary suffering. Not all suffering is necessary. Maybe no suffering is necessary. And that's it, guys. What if, we suddenly realize we are selecting our suffering? What if that's what's happening? Right? That means even if outer realm events cause us suffering, we are choosing to incorporate that event as a sort of meaning, right? So our attitude is the life-giving sun to the emptiness of objects, objective events. For me, I do have a poetically self ritual with my mind, and what I mean by that is like from when I have concluded gratefulness is the ultimate antenna state. That means when a human being becomes grateful, the karmic turbulence goes away and the piloting becomes strangely very smooth. Right? When there's an appreciation of existential value, it's as if poetically the eyes in the sky or the lords of karma are like, there we go, a human being that knows, that appreciates where it is. Right? So the first is you appreciate the location of your intelligence, right? But you don't get attached to it through ideologically. Right? And I would say when you have a grateful attitude, what it means is life has given you enough. But in the inner realms I'm speaking about, that means imagine the inner realms was an all-you-can-eat buffet and you had 8 enough. You know? Everybody wants to be successful, but nobody really wants to look at the future. Isn't that hilarious? We all want something better, but we don't want to be involved in bringing out that better dimension of humanity. And this will automatically change, you know. It's as if the person was trying to walk slowly and then lightning hit and the person started running automatically, you know. You know, and so we're gonna reach a point in human civilization where we're gonna mess up and we're gonna be like, okay, we messed up too much now, right? Like, we're gonna freak out, and then through our freaking out, it's gonna be a backup system for a revolutionary shift in collective behavior. You know, imagine a person who is falling like from a mountain, right? I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you actually a really cool story. There's a story of this hiker, you know, this mountain climber, and it's like one of those kind of like snowy mountains. And this hiker falls from a cliff and has no way of climbing up, and he's just hanging from a rope, and it's late at night, and underneath his foot it's pitch black abyss. So he's hanging by this rope, and it's like underneath him there's literally just the unknown, you know. And so this guy in that moment, he's not even that religious, but he's like, what do I do in an existential scenario? And so religion has preserved the idea of the higher power, right? So this guy's like, God, help me, you know. And he's like freaking out. He doesn't know what to do, you know. And he's like, God, help me. And suddenly God comes, you know. And the God's like, yeah, I'm here, man. What do you need help with? And the person's like, oh my God, you actually came, you know. So God, in this story, this is like, you know, just an old story I'm relaying. So in this story, this guy's like, hanging by this rope, and he says, God, help me. And this voice comes, the logos animates to this person in that moment, you know. That's sometimes the power of solitude. So the logos animates to him, and the guy's saying, help me, what do I do? And the logos says, cut the rope. And the person's like, are you kidding me? You want me to cut the only thing that has kept me attached to this world? And the logos is like, yeah, cut the rope, you know. And then the person's like, no, I can't do that, you know. Like, God, are you crazy? You know. And God, that voice of the logos leaves the moment, and the person is left there the whole night. And the person's like, what do I do? You know, he's thinking, and he's gonna freeze to death, right? And he's about to cut the rope, but then he's like, no, man, I'm probably hallucinating, you know, through rationalism. It's like, this is the smartest thing to not cut the rope. And the guy stays there, right? He stays there, and he freezes, and he dies in the story. And the next day, there's this horrifying news article that there was a hiker who he died hanging to a cliff, but if he had cut the rope, there was ground a meter underneath him. Because it was night, he couldn't see that literally if he had cut the rope, nothing would have happened. He would have just hit ground, and he could have had access, right, to survival. But he denied his own access to survival because the past felt more certain about the future than the present's relationship with the unknown. And I would say shamans are those who do not ignore the signals they receive by nature. That was the whole thing of the spirit of nature, right? Because the compassion of nature is simultaneous expression. It's like one of the most basic things that all human beings know deep down. It's not just culturally acknowledged, collectively acknowledged. And it's in some sense that without gentleness, you can't see what happens in life, right? The vicious mind, in some sense, makes itself a prisoner of its own war. So in some sense, freedom is a peaceful inner state and a peaceful outer state, and a peaceful outer state so we can have space to create greatness. You know what I mean? It's like too busy fighting to even notice greatness at this point in human history. It's as if the nations are at war and someone's like, guys, what are you doing? You know, the future. Think about the future. It's like all wars were stopped when we realized we can have a better future if we live as minds, not as bodies that are trying to like drowning in time. We're trying to hold on to whatever we can to associate identity with. It's like, let us find the courage, beyond despair, beyond anguish, because there are senses of self that will remain in their own purgatory until there is a roar heard, until like Thor's hammer accidentally, breaks the linguistic simulation. It's as if Odin had created, in let's say Norse mythology, Odin had created the world that was watching human beings, and Thor was standing beside Odin, and Loki was standing beside Thor, and they were all looking at human beings. And Odin's like, my children, look at these creatures I've created, look at what's up with them, and Thor's like, yes, father, and Loki's like, yes, father, too, but his voice is less than Thor's, his voice is more distant, has more distance compared to Thor to Odin's ear. And so what happens is, imagine, Loki's thinking of a way to deceive Thor, and Thor accidentally drops his hammer. And his dad's about, like, Odin's explaining to Thor and Loki, imagine, son, children, these human beings, they are entrapped by their own languages in a linguistic simulation. And then we suddenly see the Thor's hammer that had accidentally fallen on the linguistic simulation and broken it. And human beings had become enlightened accidentally. As a species, that would be the most badass, one of the most hilarious things. It's like, how did humanity attain greatness? Accidentally, yeah. We stumbled upon greatness the moment we realized we're not just an object or a subject. It's like the greater pilot is in the room. We are passengers of a universal expression. Like, that's where we find inner peace. That's where all the judgment in the outer realms goes away. That's when we realize we are just attention roaming the space-time continuum through elemental, biomechanistic form, So we are literally the commander of the elemental realm, all of us. And when we wake up in the morning, people don't hear it, but if they could, the logos is like, welcome back, commander, like a sort of Jarvis, it's like, as you enter the Iron Man suit, the voice of, collective intelligence is accessible. That means it was as if knowledge is not power. The more aware of information you are, you're just living in a greater universe. The concept of karma is a very interesting concept. The way I have understood it so far, of how you escape karma, is that karma is in some sense a wheel. It's a cycle. It's the cycle of conscious state, deep sleep state, dream state, deep sleep state, conscious state, So it's a cycle. It's something that's cyclical. So the one thing we know about the wheel of karma is that any wheel mechanism, the center of the wheel doesn't move if the wheel is moving. Just like a carriage. The carriage is in stillness, but the wheels are moving, Right? So when you realize that you are the center of the wheel of karma, you realize poetically that if the soul is the extension of the Almighty, then the Almighty has no karma. So you in some sense free yourself from the shackles of how the past tried to possess your faith of the future. And the faith of the future is not to condemn. Do you know that means human beings are acting like experts on judgment, but we don't know. Like with a sort of natural event, we have all been, cast into our homes. Like during this, it's like people were thought that there were only human chant difficulties, but then it's like a virus entered the system, right? And and the virus spread all over the planet. And human beings bravely retaliated against this virus with hand sanitizer, you know, and masks, you know, ushering us into an era of probably exo strength suits and also like atmosphere suits, you know, suits where it's as if like a person can live in the most polluted country, but they're living in a sort of like, not an Iron Man suit, probably much bigger, a kind of suit or a pod where the air inside the pod is not polluted at all, right? So it's as if we are reaching a certain world where the more ignorant we are of what kind of garbage, what kind of toxins we set out into the air of our planet, and there may come a time where we have to actually be masked to be alive on Earth. So there is chemical warfare going on with the human species and its future natural possibility. You know, there's also a technological warfare, but it's not war. The reason I'm saying warfare is just to have a reason to engage something important. Man has a relationship with the plant kingdom, with the mineral, let's say with the mineral kingdom. I'll just share this quote with you. Rumi, this poet, says, excuse me. The poet Rumi says, I was a mineral. I died as a mineral and I became a plant. I died as a plant and I rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. Why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? Why should I fear death? I shall die once more to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on to that which no mind has ever conceived. That is beyond the language threshold, the ultimate destination of intelligence. We are free, but now we just need to remember it, and the advanced human arrow activates. What else can happen? It is to be friendly with the universe. That's the key step. That's something that when I look back at my own life, that was the hardest, one of the biggest obstacles I had to overcome. To not artificially love the world, but to look at it in such a way where you can see the value of your own heartbeat in a universal sector, right? You know, we have been stripped of our honor as multidimensional beings and cast into an absolutist objective simulation, shackled by language. We have to live, right? So now we are living not in the most efficient state of the human mind. And you know, they say wise men plant trees where they will not be sitting under their shade. And imagine if 8 billion people started planting trees, not caring for what the tree has to value to them, right? Life is just a giant walk where 8 billion creatures are walking. Imagine 8 billion people. Just imagine the world wasn't like a sphere, it was just this giant rectangle where we couldn't see its ends, right? And so we were 8 billion human beings just walking. The purpose of life was just to walk to the edge of infinity of this giant like road of our planet. Right? So imagine if the planet was just like a road in outer space that was infinite, right? So we'd be 8 billion human beings walking in the void, and it's as if like all that I'm saying is that it's as if we can walk through our own sphere. Like we could position humanity, as Buckminster Fuller and Marshall McLuhan suggested, as spaceship Earth, and everybody is a crew member. You know, and it's that point where if you don't care about the future, you have the past has charmed you into has enchanted you into a magnificent sleep. And you know, it's as if like sometimes alarm clocks are like prophets, you know, revealing us, calling us back to the waking state. In the subtitle, when I say focusing on the shaman's invisible sight, by invisible sight, I mean the mind, our mind space. Imagine how hilarious there's a body space, mind space, soul space, you know, solar space. You know what it is? It's as if the universe is challenging the human species. I gotta say this, the universe, it's like the universe is challenging the human species, and those species, is about to go to war with the unknown. Right? It's as if the unknown's like, you can go extinct at any time. What are you going to do about it, human species? And the human species is like, okay, we got to do something, guys. You know, and so and so there's retaliation, global networks of information, as if that we create a grand information highway, you know, and we try to develop the potential of the prototype of the first communication-based, naturally equivalent, unnaturally equivalent human hive mind, right? This, I don't mean we connect all our brains to a computer. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying in the sense of we use communication as a canal, right? Information canals all going to one grand stage. Imagine a gladiator, imagine a coliseum for the greatest ideas to challenge each other, you know, in the future. How we retaliate against the unknown is that we find allies. And what are the allies of the human being? One ally of the human being is the mind, the inner realms, right? That's a great ally of the human being, right? And the next ally is nature. These are allies. And the third ally, where this one is very difficult, it's based on our energy levels, it's time. And time is actually very hard to call an ally. Maybe we should call it as not like in the more of like the opponent position. But what I'm saying is like it's as if like an intelligent being that has landed on a planet is instantaneously scanning the environment for allegiance, which in some sense means the expansion of the effort of the whatever system the being is. Right? That means survival is in some sense the breaking point of a system, or a system aware of its breaking point and retaliating. The Great War is not human beings hitting each other with objects at fast speeds. The great war of humanity is with an allegiance of, oh, I forgot another ally, technology. You know, the AI mind is going to become an incredible ally of the human species. So with technology as an ally, with nature as an ally, and with the creative space of the mind as an ally, the logos, it's as if man is retaliating against the void, and it's as if each being a giant army. Imagine like an army, huge giant army, and you're standing on a hilltop, and you're watching, like, you know, like as if the expansion of an empire, right? Even though back in the day life was brutal and wild, you know, and the decency was hard to find, but now, with a compassionate army of an intellectual surge, like, you can totally see giant movements, you know, taking place. And you know, the thing is that it's as if there is so many more heroes in the world in hiding. I would say there is genius. We are at a phase in history where genius is too shy. You know, where ability is hiding. Okay, that's a better way of saying. Right, where there is way more that the human effort can do on the surface of this rock in the middle of nowhere. And I would say poetically, it's not survival of the fittest anymore. It's the survival of the most conscious activation to the realm. That means it's as if the mind doesn't really care about objects, it cares about if it's being understood, right? This is why understanding is a superior gift of the intellect, right? When a person cares to understand something, that means they're putting their whole world on pause, and they're just looking at something else for a moment and to see what it is. And so, let us say, first army that has sent forth as a retaliation to nature is the existence of nature. So nature is in the front lines of the battle with the void. The second is the mind. So the mind and let's say the earth. Let's say nature as an ally and the mind as an ally. These are ancient allies. You know, these allies have been there as long as the human form has been continuously evolving and surviving. Technology is the new ally. And so now we have come to a point where the mind has to stop playing, you know, subjective narrative, like character games. It's like a video game. The person can't decide how to create their character. It's like we should move past that phase, right? And come to this sense where, okay, there is technologies accessible in our outer realms, and our inner realms give the outer realms meaning. So if a technology wants to be used in the best possible way, the inner realms have to find the best possible meaning or approach to the situation. As if every moment in life, one can fathom somebody else in the world doing it better than them. So it becomes a moment where it's like you can always, upgrade, or the upgrade is hiding. With enough patience and simple observation, I would say complexity expands. The shaman was riding the waves of the divine will. That's really true spirituality, where your mind has become a river, you know, of an infinite presence of really what intelligence is. You know, that means the only way we know there's intelligence here is because human beings are moving in sophisticated ways. Animals are moving, less sophisticated ways, but they're moving still, right? And animals communicate. Somebody put a microphone at the corner of a beehive, and it's as if the bees are talking to one another. It's as if like a community. And it's as if personality surpasses the body, and if it does, that means there's a sort of strange pantheistic, philosophically oriented view that animals can actually be people. Because if the mind is in a dimension that had nothing to do with the body, so that means it's like anything can be embodied. Or in the poetic sense where, for example, Zeus, when he would come to earth, he would turn into an eagle. That means the eagle could instantly be embodied by a godly vision within, right? So let me conclude that the great work of the human species is to advance communication in the inner realms and advance civilization in the outer realms. And if we can make this happen as if a bird is flying properly and its wings are flying at the same time, we will have the greatest piloted outcome of the retaliation of a living phenomenology against the void. You know, that means our mind is like what is challenging the gods, and our soul is the gods. So we are challenging the deepest part of nature by wondering what we are. You know, like that's the coolest thing about the mind, that it is in some sense a domain where in some sense man was in the presence of the gods already. You know, as if your head was above the clouds of Mount Olympus. You know? And just to, you know, again, not to ideologically love life, because that's impossible. Character changes all the time. But to, in some sense, be fascinated by how an unknown universe is here and you're in it. And how you move. It's as if the brain is a problem-solving engine. Till the end of life, there will be scenarios, and then they're required for an intelligent human response to it. Right now, we can calculate our responses. You know, we can notice what's coming before it hits us. You know. And that's in some sense an ability to advance the psychology of people in the next 30 years to a point where we're content with the multidimensional, so we don't freak about every belief not being similar to ours. You know? It's like the world has to open its eyes to a future that had never failed. And it can be done in an instant, you know. If the eyes of my soul could speak, they would say, "Rise, mankind, rise," you know. That means I'm a person, when I walk outside, in my mind, I can fathom a giant shadow of a sky city on the world, you know. That means it's like the mind is, it's literally Photoshop if you're conscious of it. And it's like new experiences. It's like downloading new Photoshop brushes, you know? Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I'll be on Discord for a little while if anybody has a question. Much blessings and us. And please consider becoming a member. In the project supporter meetings, I'm going to talk about pretty much the School of Athens and how, in some sense, I have this view that through cyberspace we can actually, through our communication, we can project an advanced civilization as a sort of. Anyways, it's a giant thing where I would I'll brief the members when that day comes. Anyways, thanks for listening. No, it's